Our next speaker needs no introduction. An author, a writer, a strategist, a corporate maverick, having been featured in the case studies at the Advanced Management School at Harvard, besides being their alumni. He put aside his regular daily dynamism at the young age of 50 to script what is the better way of living, making time for what makes you and not just what you made. Today we will hopefully walk out of here as better beings, more aware of what we seek and sharing that. Professor Gurcharan, please may I request you to come up on board.
I noticed on the board it said Management Guru. So let me just quickly begin by saying that my idea of such a guru is good at understanding, GU, but relatively useless. Of course, my name has Guru in it, so this presents a problem. But it wasn't always so until the age of 3, until the age of 4, my name was Ashok Kumar. But my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, had given me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with a Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. He was a big deal in the 1940s. So she took me to a guru, she placed me at his feet, and she told the guru, Guruji enu na deo, give this boy a name. And the guru looked down, smiled, and he said, since you put him over there, let's call him Gurcharan Das. So overnight, at the age of 4, I was transformed from the Prince of Happiness, Ashok Kumar, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru. So I asked the Guru, many years later, I asked the Guru, why did you give me that name? And he says, well, you know, it's always good to be reminded of humility. And then he gave the very best definition of humility I have heard. And it is to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. So that has actually become, the dedication to my latest book, a memoir, which is called Another Sort of Freedom. And I guess the idea, it's dedicated to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously. And that is, to me, the root to that other sort of freedom as well. Anyway, I'm glad the introduction that this very nice lady gave me, I got worried because she began by saying, oh, he's too well known, he doesn't need an introduction. Well, you know, a few months ago, somebody said that at one of some event where I was speaking, and he says, well, he doesn't need any introduction, so the less said about him, the better. Anyway, I don't think he realized what he was saying. So, as I said, I've written this memoir, Another Sort of Freedom, and in it, you know, when I wrote it during the COVID period, and when I wrote it, I realized you have to relive your life. You have to remember. And what let me in to you guys on a secret. What I have learned is that reliving your life is actually better than living it. And why? It's in the same way your memory of an event is better than the event itself, because the event may have taken place 50 years ago, but when you remember it 50 years later, you're remembering it with 50 years of experience which you are investing into that event. And what you're doing in a memoir is that you are connecting the dots of your life. Now, this is where a memoir is different from an autobiography. Autobiography is straightforward. I was born here, I went to school here, I got married here, I worked here, blah, 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 boringly, your whole life. A memoir is in connecting those dots of your life. You discover a pattern or patterns, and that then becomes the theme of your book. So memoir doesn't even have to be about the whole life. It can be only a part of the life. But there's a theme. And so actually it's a memoir is a way to get to know yourself, who you are. And suddenly you write, oh my God, when you've written it, you feel, is this what this person is really like? And it's an everyday surprise. So my advice to all of you, whether you want to publish it or not, you may not be writers or not, but think of writing a memoir, because you will get to know yourself better. Okay. Now the theme of my talk is making a life versus making a living, and this also partly a running theme in my life, my book, and it begins in kindergarten. I'm 4.5 years old in Lahore, 1947. And I come home from school one day with a report card in my hand, and my mother's waiting at the door, and she opens the door and she sees me smiling, and she asks, did you stand first? My father is a little bit behind her, and he says to her, that was the wrong question. And I guess what he then goes on to explain is, ask him what he likes about school. Does he like to draw? Does he like stories? Who are his friends? And really, so what my father was doing was early on telling my mother and me that to find yourself, in other words, to find yourself. And because we are not all like Mozart. At the age of 3, Mozart knew that he was a musical genius, and lucky for the world, his father was a musician, so he understood that this man, and by 5 he had written his first symphony. Most of us, we kind of stumble through life. In fact, I was telling Anil that we actually sleepwalk through life. And my father wanted me to not do that. He wanted me to have a purpose. So I never quite knew what he meant until, let's press fast forward. So from the age of 4.5, we jump to age 17, and I have just won a scholarship to go to Harvard, which was very unusual in those days, but it happened. And so we are at Palam Airport in Delhi, waiting for the Air India flight to take me to America. And my mother's got tears in her eyes, and in those tears she's saying now to me, make sure you study something useful. You have to come back and make a living. And then she says, why don't you study engineering? Be like your father. My father was an engineer. India needs engineers. You'll always get a job. So dutifully, I arrive at Harvard and I write down my major as engineering. I had a roommate, and my roommate was studying Russian literature. So he tells me one day, he tells me at lunchtime, he says, Gurcharan, if you are planning to have an affair with a married woman one day, it should be Anna Karenina. He's been reading that novel, and he's obviously in love with Anna Karenina, and he's beginning to tell me all her virtues. And I'm thinking while he's talking, Are yaar, what the hell? Here I am mugging Bernoulli's equations and calculating pipe friction, and this guy is dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina. Something is wrong. And so next semester I change. I say no engineering for me. What do? I fall in love with the liberal arts, and I study Greek tragedy. I take a course on I study at the comparative literature. I study Bauhaus architecture, Renaissance painting, Beethoven's music, history of capitalism, and other courses in philosophy, politics, economics, and I even take a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears that I am studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she says, hi, mera munda. Dead language, now only the dead will give him a job. And so my father has to reassure her that he is making a life through books. And then my junior year, third year, even Harvard gets a bit worried. So I'm called by the dean, and who says, son, you got to declare a major. And so what will it be? And so he says, and then you have to study enough courses in that major and write a thesis. So what will it be? I said, philosophy. Suddenly I remembered one of the courses I had was on Plato and Aristotle. And he says, why? Why do you want philosophy major? I said, to be happy. Pin drop silence. And he says, good reason, although this is the first time I've heard it. And so I did philosophy. And then I got a scholarship to go to Oxford to do a PhD, a DPhil in philosophy. And that summer I'm back home in India. And we live in Chandigarh. At the time, my father works for the Punjab government as an engineer, making trips to Bhakra Dam every few weeks. And we also, one day, I was in the park in Chandigarh has many parks, so I was actually lying down in the park looking at the stars in the evening, and I asked myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. I said, I want a life of action. And so I didn't quite know what that kind of life would be, but I quietly wrote to Oxford that I'm not coming. And my mother's worst nightmare has come true. She has a grown up son at home, unemployed, Vela. That's the word we use in Punjabi, Vela. And we have a nosy neighbor who comes and visits my mother in the mornings, and she asks her invariably, Thoda munda ki kar raha? What is your son doing? And my mother always gets embarrassed, and so I see her embarrassment, and I quickly answer the first ad in the paper that I find, and it's from a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub. And so I go for the interview. They call me and I go for the interview, and the interviewer is an Indian who has America returned Indian, who has a very American accent, and he begins by asking me, what is your objective? And I said, happiness. And he says, wrong answer. I meant, do you want to be in finance, marketing, production? What would you want to do? And then at that point, his secretary walks in, stunning woman, in a stunning figure, and she brings tea, coffee for both of us and biscuits, and my attention is totally diverted to her as she goes out. I'm looking this way, and he is drawing my attention. He says, we are having an interview now. And so, and then he asks me, why happiness? So I launch on what will make you happy, basically saying. And I say, what's on my mind? I said, a beautiful woman. And then he has a little bit of he has a laugh. And I realize the interview has not gone well so far. And I go home to Chandigarh, and but in a few days they tell me I've got the job. So I have the job, and I land up in Bombay, where the offices are. It's an American multinational company, and on the very first day, maybe I'll skip this because time. I have to worry about my half an hour and then 10 minutes of Q&A. So, let me jump further because I could go on and on. Let's then jump actually quite a few years. I begin to find, I joined Vicks, and I'm suddenly transported from the ivy-covered halls of Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India, where I'm going around from chemist shop to chemist shop saying, aaj free egg dozen, egg free, aaj free egg dozen, kitna loge, and so on. and this is part of my sales training, and I enjoy it. It's very different, but after a few years, I feel uneasy. I miss the intellectual life. And so my father and I have a conversation, and my father says, well, nothing to, you have a weekend. You're an American company, so they respect your weekend. And so why don't you do something that you really like to do if you are bored at your job? And so I start reading, and after a few months of reading, I realized that, this can't, I'm just consuming. Now I must deliver, I must produce something. And so I decided to write a play. And one Sunday morning, I get up, clean sheet of paper, pen in my hand, and I say to myself, it must have been a morning like this when Shakespeare also sat down to write Hamlet. So I can do it too. And so with that confidence of a 23-year-old, I write my first play, and it's lucky. It wins a big prize. That time 10,000 rupees was a lot of money in 1963. And so everyone, all the writers, Kushwant Singh, everybody that time, Santa Rama Rao, have written for this, but I get the prize. And the play is performed, it's published by Oxford University Press, and then by then I'm transferred to New York headquarters, and I'm continuing the same routine. I write on weekends, Saturday to Sunday, from 6 to 12. So the family knows that that's the time I'm not available. But anyway, in New York, I write another play called Meera, and the director there sets it to Meera Bhajans. This is Meerabai, and it sets Meera's poetry into rock music, and it sweeps off Broadway, and it's a success. At that time, I also meet my wife, and I contemplate quitting the corporate world for becoming a full-time writer. But since I've just met the woman who's going to be my wife, she very sensibly advises me that we need a monthly check. And so I carry on. But the point of what I'm trying to do here is the book and my life, what I've learned from my relived life is that it's a search that all of us to live a life of purpose, a life of meaning. And frankly, I don't believe you don't find yourself, you create yourself. And so let's jump over. Now I'm in my late 40s, and I'm at the world headquarters of the company. I became head of P&G. Vicks VapoRub was bought worldwide by Procter & Gamble, and so I was head of India and also part of Asia, and I'm taken to headquarters for grooming me for other things, and I'm frankly very bored. And the next morning, one morning, we have an important worldwide meeting on Pampers. All the managers of Pampers around the world have come to make presentations. And I'm at that time a managing director for strategic planning. So I have called this meeting. And on the way to the office in the car, I turn on the radio, And the radio is announcing the fact, NPR station, that the reforms in India are in trouble. Now this is, for me, a very serious thing, because I believe, I should have told you another story, but there's no time. But I believe that India got its freedom not in 1947, but in 1991. And 1991 is when our nation's real story begins. And so for me, that was Diwali, July 24th, 1991. And every government after that, of course, as you know, for 30 years, India has grown at almost 6% average for the 30-year period, which is amazing for a democracy. Thanks to the reforms, we have lifted 450 million people out of poverty. The middle class has grown from 10% to 30%. So that's the effect of the reforms. But the announcer on the radio is saying that the reforms in India are in trouble because the left wing of the Congress party has said India has sold out to the World Bank, to the IMF, to America, and no one's defending the reforms, and frankly they have turned against Narasimha Rao. The Congress party itself has turned against Narasimha Rao, and his position is in trouble. So this is very disturbing for me. And here I'm going to a meeting on Pampers. And as I'm walking to that meeting, I'm saying to myself that there's a fire burning in our country. And what am I doing in Cincinnati, Ohio, attending a meeting on Pampers, where everybody's going to talk about what they're doing and how great they are, etc., etc. So I get very depressed, and I have the equivalent of a midlife crisis. I take a leave of absence from the office for a few weeks to get my head straight. Meantime, I shoot off a telegram to Manmohan Singh. Luckily, I had met Manmohan Singh when I was CEO of Procter & Gamble, when he was in the Planning Commission, not a very senior person, and we had discussed some things, and I liked him very much. And now he's the finance minister. And so, to his credit, Manmohan Singh replies, so my telegram says, you know, what's going on? The reforms are in trouble, I hear, and why is nobody defending them? And so he telegrams back to say, you come back and you sell the reforms. Because, you know, Margaret Thatcher used to say, I spend 20% of my time reforming and 80% selling the reforms. Even Deng Xiaoping in China, who didn't have to sell anything, but he was selling the market. And you have to sell it, because it's not instinctive for even an intelligent person doesn't obviously understand that millions of people working for their own profit, for their own salaries, ultimately lead to prosperity in society. That's why Adam Smith called it the invisible hand that makes it happen. Now, since it's invisible, you have to make it visible. And that's, of course, one of the, we are not discussing this subject, but that's been one of the problems with the reforms, that we haven't sold them. Now, I heard a bell ring. Is that a signal of some? I've got a few minutes. So, anyway, my my wife was a good sport. She agreed. I had to sit down with an Excel sheet to show her how much savings we had, and we had worked. I was at high enough a level, so I was earning quite a lot, but I'd already worked for a few years, and so we had savings, and then I, you know, how this would be our expenses. We did budgeting, and she finally agreed, and so I came back, and for the last 25, 30 years, I've been a writer. So I've had two careers, and I started by writing a column in the Times of India, which I continued for 25 years, and mostly it was selling the reforms, but also other subjects. So that's kind of my story, and one of the things I've learned from this story is that, you know, people think that even I believed when I became a writer that I would become a better human being. Wrong. That was a myth. I think I may have actually degenerated. And why? And I've concluded now that actually we put writers, artists on a pedestal. But in fact, I believe that business people are better human beings because they know instinctively interdependence. They depend on others. They need customers. They know they have to please their customer. Then they have suppliers. They have to be fair to their suppliers. They have to be fair. I mean, every company has a temptation to squeeze the supplier a little bit more. And if you squeeze too hard, you'll get a component that will hurt your product. And you have employees. You have to treat them well. You have to treat them fairly, otherwise they leave you, and all your investment in your people is lost. So I think that this makes business people, in many ways, much more, they understand that their success depends on others. A writer like me sits in a bubble, writes from 6 to 12 every day, and doesn't see anybody. I don't even do email in the morning. I don't do social media in the morning. I don't answer the phones in the morning. I don't read the newspaper in the morning. So, in a bubble. And I think that is one sobering lesson. Now, if we had time today, I would have told you another story, and even more powerful story, about a security guard in my company who actually went on to become a very senior manager. A security guard who was metric pass, who didn't know English, and in a multinational company, he rose very high. Now, he was a person who made his life at work. I made a life in wearing two hats, two lives in a way. But he made it at his job. And that's also possible. So there are many ways of doing it. I mean, he loved his work so much, I think he would have paid us to come to work. That sort of person. And a person who, anyway, we don't have the time today to talk about it, but read my book. It's available in the stores or Amazon. And okay, now we go into Q&A, and I see a question at the back. Another one here. Let's go right at the back, the gentleman, he raised his hand. Okay, so, yeah.
Hi, Mr. Das. Good afternoon. one regret, I kept your book, The Difficulty of Being Good, on my desk before driving down from the mountains, and I forgot it. I wanted it to be autographed. One thing you write in the book is Vidur tries to justify what Dushasan did to Draupadi by saying that he had momentarily lost his mental balance.
Right.
And in today's day and age, in a society that we live in today, where the society has been further divided, the fissures have come into the surface, the the bigotry that was buried has
Yes.
now come out into the open in a very vicious manner.
Right.
And you see this across all circles and all stratas of society. In a situation like this, how do you see the way forward in terms of, is it still important being good in public and private life, or is it about the fact that today means don't justify, means don't justify the ends at all today? What is your take on this, sir?
Well-
Mr. Das, good evening. My name is Ajit. I've got a very similar question, so if I can just add on
Take
to the
two.
question.
We'll take two at a
So it's
time.
going to be along same lines. I'd just like to say I'm a great fan of yours, so I'm taking this in as a bit of a fanboy moment. I've pretty much read all the books you've authored, and thanks for bringing so much joy to our lives. You're one of the greatest thinkers of our lives, and you touched upon 1991. So in 2006, Tony Blair once famously said that global politics is no longer about left and right, it's about open and closed countries. And so would just like your perspective, very similar but albeit less controversial a question.
Yeah, right. So, can we just, I'll forget the questions otherwise. So,
How difficult it is today to be good in the public and
how
private life?
difficult to be good, yeah.
In the sense that today, in the last 10 years, the fissures have come into the surface.
Got it.
The buried bigotry has now come into the open.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah,
got
thanks.
it.
Thank you.
I remember your question. So, first thing is a commercial break. I've just written a book called The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal. It just came out last month. And some of the answers to your questions are right there. And if I started to answer your question fully, I'm afraid the chai will get cold outside. You're raising very, very good questions, and but very quickly, the dilemma that I have is that with this bigotry, with all kinds of illiberalism that is happening to our democracy, we are becoming an illiberal democracy from a liberal democracy. I find it personally hard now to support, particularly in this campaign, when we have heard this Hindu-Muslim stuff, which was not there. I mean, 2014, a lot of us were supporting Modi and this government. We were supporting, particularly after the terrible UPA 2 government that we had, but now this campaign has been really shocking, and so it's very hard to support this government. But at the same time, look at the other side. Who do we vote for? I mean, the basic DNA of the Congress is still the old socialist DNA, and their answer to jobs are, as I said, we've grown at 6% a year, which is fantastic, but we haven't created the jobs that 6% growth should have created. And why? Because our model was wrong. I mean, there was a straightforward model sitting in front of us for the last 50 years, and that was the rise of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Asian tigers, and the latest is China. They all did it through the export of labor-intensive manufactures. I believe we can still do it. In fact, our condition today, our situation in India, we have a far more, we have amazing infrastructure that has been created. So our road mileage has doubled from 2011 to now. Our port handling capacity has quadrupled. The railways has become quite a different thing. And I could go on, give you examples. The digital revolution has taken out a lot of the friction. The 42% of Indians had bank accounts. Now almost 90%. And they've never seen a bank, but they have a bank account. So it's really, we are ready. But the reality is, with Modi's, at least he has executional ability. They've got things done. The welfare payments that have gone now, and apart from infrastructure, the welfare benefits, all these things show that here's a person who can get things done. And now you read this morning Sitaraman's speech in the papers, where she says our first priority is to, basically in my words, would be to create an industrial revolution, meaning manufacturing and the export of manufactured products. And that's really, otherwise how do we take 45% of our people who are on the farm to higher productivity, higher income jobs into the middle class? We won't be a success. In 2047, 50 to 60% of our population will have to be middle class if we want to achieve the objective that Modi is talking about. And that can be done. All these countries have done it. So, and Vietnam looks like is on its way too. So that's really the dilemma. That if you vote Modi, you're voting for prosperity, you're voting for the hope that these reforms that he couldn't do in his first 2 terms can now be done, labor, land, farms, etc., plus other reforms that still. So it's not inevitable that it will happen. It will require heavy lifting. I just don't trust the India coalition to do that heavy lifting. And that's where I feel, yes, I don't like as a liberal, I believe in openness. I believe in a rule of law, institutions, all these things. And they're all under stress now. And the only thing I can say, you might like to read the book, this essay is that history is cyclical. And so there are periods when you have to tame the state, and there are periods when you have to tame the market. And we went too far. The neoliberals went too far in opening up banking, etc., and caused the crash and the inequality in the world, etc., which is causing. It's not an Indian problem. It's a worldwide problem, this whole thing. We're going through an illiberal phase. Time's up, I'm being told. There's a question. Can we just take a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
May I?
Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you so much for the time you've given us. My question is, what would be your what would be your top predictions of what the next 5 years will be like, economy or social, or like what are the changes we are likely to see in the next 5 years according to you? Hello.
Well, it depends who gets elected. And it's not an open and shut case. This looks like a much closer election. Otherwise, you would not have the kind of behavior that we are seeing in the terms of election speeches. It's like almost desperation, which is being showing. So it's not certain, but if I would say if the UPA or the India alliance gets elected, I think some of the problems that both of the speakers pointed out will be to some extent restored, but we can kiss goodbye to the economy. I think I just don't trust their capability to do the reforms. They don't believe in those reforms, first of all. And secondly, even if they believed in them, they could not muster up the whatever it takes to do them. So that's the picture, my dear.
So, can I ask now?
Yes. Sure.
Gurcharan Das ji, my Abhinandan to you. I'm Nalima Saxena. I just heard you. From engineering to philosophy. Should I stop?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, please.
Your travels from engineering to philosophy to CEO to writing. Wonderful. I thought I heard that you said you don't answer your phones anymore. You don't answer your emails. So I have 3 points. Huh? So what's your morning like? Second thing, I just want to know who are your publishers? Are you having the same publishers for each book? And what's the latest you're writing now?
What's the latest?
You're writing now. Because
Okay.
I'm gearing up for finishing 1 or 2 of my books, so I just got
Okay.
very interested
Well,
when I heard you.
it's.
Thank you.
What was your first question?
What's your morning like when you're not answering your
yeah,
phones
yeah.
and emails
Well,
and everything?
I answer them in the afternoon. I look at emails in the afternoon. I talk to my secretary in the afternoon.
Yeah, so you have a
I
secretary.
have a secretary, but I'm insulated in the mornings from all that. I read the newspaper in the afternoon. I do all the things that one does, the dunyadari, etc., in the afternoon.
So what's the morning like?
Morning is writing, and I'm glad you asked, because that is the way. The book's title is Another Sort of Freedom, and I believe that when one is absorbed in something, you forget yourself. You forget the time. You say, oh my God, it's 5:30. I thought it was 4. So 1.5 hours you've lost. That's that period of self-forgetting. And that's when a human being, see, the problems are, all our problems of happiness and other things are because we don't follow the mantra that the Guru told me, of not taking yourself too seriously.
Well, thank you so much.
So that's the self-forgetting is the answer.
It's somewhat similar for me, so that's why. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, so
I would
my
rather
publishers
borrow
are
your
Penguin.
publishers though. Thank you.
Penguin Random House.